So, with all drugs being decriminalized in Oregon, I feel like now's a good time to talk about psychedelic safety for first-timers. I'm making this video so that people don't hurt themselves. Psychedelics are very powerful, even though they're some of the most harmless compounds that the human body can ingest. That being said, what they can put your mind through is beyond anything you could possibly do for yourself. Now, I'm not going to sit here and explain what dimethyltryptamine, psilocybin, and lysergic acid is. If you're clicking on this video, then you probably already know, and if you don't, there are enough sources out there that will inform you. Now, if you don't agree that these compounds are some of the most harmless compounds that a human being can ingest, I implore you do your own research before continuing this video. My interest is not dealing with closed minds, but helping those whose minds wish to open. Alright, so you know you want to try a psychedelic, but the first thing you want to ask yourself is why? Every time someone tells me that they want to try a specific drug, I always ask them why. See, I never took them because I wanted to experiment with drugs or I wanted to be loaded beyond my imagination. I took them because I was curious. I'd been told that they had healing capabilities. They were described to me as though they were vitamins for your soul. That they had the ability to reveal things to me that I wouldn't be able to see without them. Now, I know this all sounds hippy-dippy, but psychedelics are nothing to mess around with. They treat you the way that you need to be treated, and if you try to take them as a party substance, they're going to introduce you to a party that you're never going to forget. So the first piece of advice that I have if you're going to take a psychedelic is figure out why. Are you interested in growth? Are you curious about their potential access to spirituality? Are you just curious in general about them, being as they've been used by every civilization that we currently know about? Once you figure out why, it's time to figure out which psychedelic you want to take and how much. The two most common for first-time use is LSD and mushrooms, though people have tried 2CB, dimethyltryptamine, and mescaline as their first-time psychedelic. But, to make it simple, let's just start with mushrooms. The great thing about mushrooms is you know what you have. The problem with buying drugs online is you could get something shipped to you and it says it's LSD, and the fact of the matter is, it's not. A very common trick that people will do online is you'll go to buy tabs of LSD and then you'll get what's known as an NBME. And the reason this is dangerous is because you could take as many tabs of LSD as you want, and though it may not treat you well, it's not going to kill you. It cannot harm your body. However, even just 2 tabs of an NBME can kill you. This is why mushrooms are great. An easy way to find out if you have magic mushrooms is just to bruise them. If they bruise blue, then you have psilocybin-based mushrooms. Makes it easy, keeps it safe, but the downfall is if you find mushrooms in the wild or you buy them from a grower, there's no possible way to figure out how potent the mushrooms you have are. I've had 2 grams of mushrooms feel like 4, and I've had 4 grams feel like 1. And there's no guarantee to know how potent what you have is. So if you're starting off, take it slow. Take somewhere around a gram for your first time, and if you feel like you need a little more, you can always redose up to 2 hours after you ingested the first amount. Remember, you can always take more, but you can't take less, so take it slow. LSD, on the other hand, is a great one to start with, so long as you know you have LSD. One way that you can do this is by buying an Elric testing kit online. Just using one of these kits to test your stuff can save your life. And I know a lot of people are not going to be really interested in buying one of these kits just to test a tab, but I promise you, this is your life you're playing with. You don't want to be messing around. If you're going to be buying LSD, then make sure that you have what you think you do. It's just worth it. Now, the great thing about LSD compared to mushrooms is that you can have a way more precise dose. Generally, people take 100 to 150 UG for their first dose, but I would recommend cutting that tab in half and starting off slow. I think it's more than okay to dip your toes in. As far as I'm concerned, LSD has always treated me better than mushrooms have, and I'd like to get into the comparisons for you guys so that maybe it can help you figure out which compound you'd like to start with. Let's start with mushrooms. Mushrooms feel like they're in control, especially during the come-up. You have no control over what you're going to be shown, and you're also going to be way more sensitive on mushrooms than on LSD. A quick example of this is there was one day where I was tripping on mushrooms, and I had a trip where my mother was dying. She was in a hospital bed, and I was right there with her, and then all of a sudden, she died. And I realized in that moment that that was it. I was no longer ever going to see or talk to my mother ever again. When I came out of that trip, I realized that I only have so much time with this person that I love, and I can't take any of that time for granted. Now, this is an example of a trip that could scare some people. If they take it too seriously, they might believe that this trip is telling them that their mother is going to die. It could really freak them out, and this is one piece of advice that I have when tripping on mushrooms. If you can help it, what you need to do is when you exit a trip, remember that that was a trip. That you've come back here, you can look at your body for reassurance that you're okay, and then you've got to be able to breathe it out and let it go so that when you go into the next trip, which is going to happen, you don't carry that pain, those emotions, that sorrow in there with you. Because what you're going to do is end up perverting that next trip, and as you stack all these negative emotions up, you're just going to cement in these terrible trips for the rest of your time because you couldn't let this one go. It's very important that when these trips end, you let them go. See, mushrooms have a tendency to hold on to you, and they don't want to let go. And generally, it's really good. It feels like a hug. You've got all these really warm, very beautiful energies around you, filling you with love. But as loving as they can be, sometimes you're going to go through an experience where it's going to be rough. And it feels like those energies have thrown you into a pool, picked it up while you're drowning, and are shaking it around. And there's not really much you can do about that. See, as scary as that concept is, and as scary as it is to be in there, you just have to go through it. If you're the kind of person who can let go and watch the world dissolve around them with no judgment, then this is going to be a really good experience for you, and it's actually going to be very easy for you to go through these heavier trips. I want to say too, regarding that heavy trip scenario, that generally doesn't happen to newcomers. That's typically something that happens to people who've taken large doses over a long period of a few years. So it's not likely that you're going to end up involved in a situation like that, but it's good to know that if you are, you should know how to handle it. Psychedelics don't affect everybody the same. Some people take 1 gram and it feels like 5. I don't know why that happens, but some people's metabolism really latch onto these things, and it can be way stronger than they initially anticipated it to be. I'm saying this because I'm not here to sugarcoat psychedelics. They can be fun and they have a lot to show you, but they can also put you through the ringer. The mushroom's effects are also kind of distracting sometimes. Runny nose, sweaty palms, a terrible stomachache, and you can remedy that stomachache with like ginger tea and stuff like that. If you're worried about having a bad trip while you're on them, take a deep breath and remember that you're okay. Remember that this compound cannot physically hurt you, and you can also take lavender pills which induce calm, and that can set you up for having good trips the entire time. LSD, on the other hand, is completely different and does not act that way. Though it does take me to the same mindful place, it doesn't make me as nauseous as mushrooms does. However, it does make me feel very uncomfortable in my own body. The come-up is rough. Mushrooms feel like you've been strapped to a chair and VR goggles have been put over your face and there's nothing you can do. You just gotta go on the ride. LSD is a little different. It feels like you are in the cockpit of a rocket. It's way more intense, way more rushy, but you to a degree have control over where you can go. This can get a little bit annoying, especially since after so many times of taking LSD, it can stop being as profound for a lot of people. There seems to be a cutoff point with LSD, and it's different for everybody. If you're the kind of person who has problem letting go of control, then LSD might be the compound for you, being as it still gives you your mind and it gives you a degree of control, while also allowing you to expand your boundaries a little bit. So that's a pretty easy one to get into. However, LSD does have a tendency to scare people more than mushrooms does. It can make you feel like you're gonna die, or it can make you feel like you're about to hurt somebody. If you're the kind of person who suffers from intrusive thoughts, and sometimes that's very difficult to discern from reality, then I definitely recommend staying away from all psychedelics in general, including marijuana. Now, I did give an example for the mushrooms, and I want to give an example of this scare thing for the LSD. So there was this time where I had taken LSD and I walked out into the city, which is a very bad idea, but I did it anyway. Now, just to make it clear, when you take a psychedelic, it feels like there's someone in your mind sharing your mind with you. They feel very intelligent, and intelligent enough to work with you enough to change your mind on certain things. On this one particular day, it was showing me how the world works. It was showing me how reality is stitched together. It was showing me how reality is manipulated by consciousness, which I'm using as buzzwords right now. I'm not really explaining what all of that means, but for the sake of this scenario, let's just say that it makes sense. So it's sharing all these secrets of reality, and then it asked me, do you understand that consciousness is reality? To which I replied, yes. It then said, do you understand that I have the power to manipulate the reality around you? Now, I'd seen enough synchronicities this day that I was like, yes, I totally see that you can do that. So it then said, do you see that bus up there? And I look up at the bus and it says, I'm going to make that bus hit you and kill you. Are you ready? Now, this is where a lot of people would become afraid by the LSD. They would become paranoid and they'd start to freak out and maybe make a scene. However, in that scenario, I looked at the bus and I said, okay, so you want to kill me with that bus? Go ahead and get it done then. What you've shown me today is that no single human life is very important. So if I die, it's not really going to have any effect on anything. You want to kill me? Get it done. The bus passes and the LSD basically said something like, okay, well, you're not gullible and I didn't get you with that. And then it filled me with some playful energy. Now, this was just my experience that I had with it. It does not have to do that to you. But this is what a lot of people report when they talk about getting paranoid on LSD. These compounds are boundary dissolving, which means that it can start playing with boundaries that you normally wouldn't play with, such as life and death. And that, a concept at all like that, could be enough to freak someone out. This gets us into the mental health aspect of these things that I'd really like to go over. People with pre-existing mental health conditions like schizophrenia, psychosis, even some people say Asperger's and bipolar disorder, if you have any of those, you may not want to go near any psychedelic at all. Based on the research we have on these things, if you have a pre-existing mental health issue, or you have some sort of mental health issue in your family, it can bring it on a lot quicker. So let's say you're going through your life and at 40 years old, you end up with some form of psychosis. If you take the psychedelic at 19, it'll bring it on now. So it's definitely something you want to stay away from, and this also includes marijuana. Now, as for neurotypical brains, the science that we have so far indicates that there's no reason to believe that a psychedelic will cause any sort of abnormality. So if you do have a neurotypical brain and you're worried that you're going to end up with psychosis because of taking LSD, the chances are very slim to none. This is the reason that I recommend people take small doses, that people tiptoe into this stuff, because you never know. I hear stories of people out there, they're like, 10 grams, my first dose, 20 grams, my first dose. And I'm just like, that's stupid. Look, fine for you, but I'm calling it out. That's a stupid move because you don't know about any sort of allergic reaction that you might have. You don't know if you have any medications that will clash with the psychedelic. And you also don't know if perhaps in your family line, there's been some sort of mental health defect. And if you go in 20 grams deep, goddamn, it's just not a smart move. So play it safe, start slow, start low, and inch your way up. When you do finally find that dose of whatever compound that you're in that gives you a life-changing experience, lock that in. There are a lot of people who say the heroic dose is 5 to 7 grams, but that's not necessarily true for everybody. There are some people who will have a life-changing experience at 2 to 4 grams. My dose is 4. Now, I'm not saying you're going to waste your mushrooms if you go a little bit higher than that. There's nothing wrong with being curious and taking that leap. I'm just saying if you do find your dose, stick with it. The next thing that we should discuss is bad trips. Now, I went into this a little bit earlier, but I really need to dig a little deeper into this because this is the one thing that the majority of people are afraid of. And the ironic part is the more fear you have for having a bad trip, the more you could set yourself up for having a bad trip. The first thing I want to do before this is talk about what a trip even is, because I feel like the majority of people don't actually know. A trip is like a dream. It's this mental manifestation of a story or an event, and you are so involved in it, it's like you're there. You ever have one of those dreams that's so vivid, and then you wake up and you're like, oh my god, I had no idea I was even dreaming. I thought that was real. That is exactly what a trip is. The only difference is when you go into a trip and you're in the situation you're in, for whatever reason, you're taught something. You come back to your reality with this new realization, and it's generally something about how you can improve yourself so that you can be a better person. Bad trips are the opposite of this. A regular trip is generally filled with love and understanding. A bad trip is dictated by fear. I think the cops are going to show up at any minute and they're going to arrest me. I think the psychedelic is going to kill me and I'm going to die tonight. What if it starts raining and I have a bad trip because of that? And one thing that you have to remember is that the trip isn't real. As much as it sucks to go through in the moment, you got to remember that even though it's bad now, it's not going to last forever. You're going to come out of this, and when you do, you have to take a deep breath, look over your body if it makes you feel reassured that you're okay, and let it go, and allow yourself to to be a clear slate so you can move into the next one and not pull that garbage in with you. Every trip, good or bad, is there to teach you something, and just because you have a bad trip, it doesn't mean it's your fault. One really important thing to remember is that while you're in the middle of a trip, good or bad, don't try to explain it to yourself or interpret it just yet, unless it just completely makes sense to you in the moment. If it's confusing or disorienting, let it go. Because when you exit the trip and you finally fully come down, that's the time that you need to take to interpret what happened to you the other day when you were tripping. For some people, it can take years to understand what happened to them and why it happened to them. And that's okay. Again, bad trips are not your fault. The only reason it's so scary is because you're letting fear in. The way that I like to think about trips in general is I'm sitting back and I'm watching alien television. Sometimes the scenes are sad. Sometimes a character dies that I really like. And yeah, that hurts. It sucks. But when the episode ends, you gotta take a breath, let it go, and continue on to the next episode. And that's what these trips really are. I know a lot of that is easier said than done, but I just don't want you guys to trick yourselves into thinking that you're gonna have a bad trip and then inadvertently throw yourselves into one because of it. It's all about just letting whatever happens happen, with no expectations. And generally when you do that, you're not going to encounter a bad trip at all. Now, there is a piece of advice on this that has not helped everybody, but at least it helps me, is the McKenna mantra. Right after Terence McKenna would ingest mushrooms, he would speak to them and he would say, "Mushrooms, I am your creature now. Please don't burn me. I only wish to learn." And I generally find that when I do that, it kind of prepares me for what I'm about to experience. I know that sounds hippy-dippy, but we're talking about psychedelics here, what can I say? Now, there are some out there who've asked if DMT is the right psychedelic for the first timer, since it's a short-acting compound that can simulate what other psychedelics may feel like at higher doses. Now, of course, if you take the 3 hits, you're screwed. 1 to 2 generally feels like 3 to 700 UG of LSD. I will say, though, that the body sensations from LSD, mushrooms, and DMT are all very different. Just because you've tried 2 hits of dimethyltryptamine does not you know what LSD feels like. Given all that information, though, I'd say that DMT is a fine compound to take for your first time. Take the hit, wait 5 minutes, and then share with your friends what happened to you and what it felt like. If you're feeling a little more bold, take another couple hits and see what that feels like. Or hell, go all the way with it, but be careful. That is one of the only psychedelics that have scared the shit out of me every single time I've tried it. It's very intense and very fast, so just a word of warning. Now, there are some residual tips and pieces of advice that I'd like to give you just to make sure that I've covered everything. The first tip that I think is one of the most important ones is research. There are some people out there who believe they can just go for it and just take the plunge, and that's more than fine, but I think it's worth researching what you're doing here. And if you're watching this video, that's already a good sign. Just please don't trip before you know what you're getting yourself into. You're likely not going to see the world the same ever again once you've taken them. And there are people out there who are not ready for that level of awareness. It can freak you out and make you think that you're the reincarnation of Jesus who came here to shift the consciousness of the entire world. And I know how specific that sounds, but trust me, that happens way more often than you might think. Just please, if you're not going to take the time to research them, don't touch them. It's probably some of the best advice I can give you. The second piece of advice is medication. If you're on any form of medication, make sure that whatever you're taking doesn't conflict with the psychedelic that you're taking. For example, SSRIs and psychedelics can be a lethal combination. Same with alcohol and psychedelics. Those can be very deadly. Benzodiazepines and other antidepressants are trip killers. So if you take benzodiazepine and then some psychedelic, it'll either do nothing or it could have some harmful effects. If you are on any medication that does conflict with the psychedelic you're taking, go off that medication for at least 2 weeks before you take the psychedelic, and then you should be okay. And then, of course, if you can't go off the medication, don't trip. It's really just not worth it. Now, you've heard this one before, setting, and intent, but this is easily one of the most important things to remember when you're going to go to trip. Make sure that you're in an environment that makes you feel comfortable and safe. Don't go out into the woods with weird people you don't know. Don't trip with assholes. Light some candles, light some incense, take a bath, put on a music playlist. Fill the room with energy that you are comfortable around. Always make sure that you have a friend near you or a group of friends who are going to ensure that you're safe. And if you don't have any friends, there are trip sitter sites that you can use where people go on and help you out if ever you're in a struggle. Now, to contradict that a little bit, generally you don't want to have screens on, so turn your phone off and leave it somewhere else, turn the TV off. And the reason I say that is because when you're tripping, your mind wants to go out. And you'll understand what I mean when you get there. But if you're looking at your screen, or any screen, it's gonna keep you trapped here. And you definitely don't want to do that to yourself. So screens off. My next piece of advice concerns the next day. Try to make sure that you have a free day the next day, especially after the first time that you're tripping, because the next day is going to be a little weird. Some people have an afterglow where they feel awesome, and then some people feel like crap, and you're gonna want to take a few days to come back to normal. And also, if you do feel like crap, don't regret everything and don't tell yourself that this is how you're going to be stuck forever, because that's just not the truth. In a couple days, you're going to return to normal, whether you have an afterglow or not. I say back to normal, you will be a little more expanded than you were before, and there's nothing you can do about that. Just try to have a free day to come down. I promise you the come down's not intense, even if it's a little rough. It's not intense. You're just going to see the world without filters for the first time ever, so it's worth it to have a day to absorb that. So you've had your first dose and you're ready for your second one. Wait. The human body develops a tolerance to psychedelics, so if you took 2 grams yesterday and you go to take 2 grams today, it may still work, but it's going to be a lot weaker. Take at least a week. The average come down time for a psychedelic to completely exit your system is 14 days, so if you can wait that long, I would recommend doing that. While you're in this 14-day period, this is the right time to really process what happened to you. If you had a rough trip, or if all of your trips were good and they had something to say, but some of them weren't really specific. Maybe some of them were a little vague or a little confusing. This is the time to really reflect on what you were shown. A lot of people skip this part, but this is a really important step. Some people want to just jump back into the action, and I can understand why. I did the same thing. But it's really good to take a step back, take the 14 days, and really examine what it was that you were shown. This time can also help you prepare for your next trip. If the trip you had was kind of unsubstantial, then now you know that you can heighten up the dose a little bit. As you go up incrementally, make note of the dose that gives you that life-changing experience. That's the one you're going to want to shoot for as often as possible. Like I said before, you can go higher if you're curious about those doses. But if you find the one that gives you the life-changing experience, that's the one that's going to save you the most amount of mushrooms as you go through, and will leave you satisfied or terrified for long enough to think about what it was that happened to you. I really hope this advice was helpful for you. There are a lot of people out there who are too afraid to make this jump, too scared to take the plunge, and I can totally understand that. There's absolutely no shame in wanting to hear more about psychedelics without ever having to do them. But if you are worried about taking them, do remember that you have a lot of options for you. I've heard of some people going out of the country to take them. They just hop on a plane and travel to a different country to have their first psychedelic experience, and I think that's a really good idea. Just make sure you have a trip advisor.